History is filled with legends, stories of heroism and sacrifice so powerful they become immortal, passed from one generation to the next. But sometimes the legend, no matter how compelling, can hide a truth that is even more profound. One of the most enduring legends from the Indian subcontinent is that of a defiant queen, a warrior who stood against the most powerful empire in the world, and for her courage was burned alive. It's a brutal, tragic ending to a heroic life. It's a story of victimhood, but it isn't the true story. The reality of how Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi met her end has been lost in the smoke of this myth. Her final moments were not those of a martyr being sacrificed, but of a soldier fighting to the very last breath. This is the story of the injustice that created a rebel, the defiance that forged a legend, and the heroic truth of her final battle. To understand how she died, we first have to understand how she lived, a life that was unconventional from the very beginning. Long before she was a queen or a rebel, she was a girl named Manikarnika Tambe, born in the holy city of Kashi. Her birth year is debated, with historians pointing to either 1828 or 1835. Nicknamed Manu, her childhood was anything but typical for a Brahmin girl of her time. Her mother died when she was only 4, leaving her to be raised by her father, who worked in the court of the exiled Maratha ruler, the Peshwa Baji Rao II. Growing up in the Peshwa's court, she was surrounded by the sons of nobility. Tradition holds that her companions included Nana Sahib and Tatya Tope, boys who would one day become her comrades in rebellion. Instead of being confined to the roles reserved for women, Manikarnika was educated at home, learning to read and write. More unusually, she trained alongside the boys in the arts of war. She became a proficient sword fighter, an expert archer, and a skilled horse rider. This wasn't the upbringing of a future queen consort, destined for a life behind palace walls. This was the making of a warrior. In 1842, her life took a seemingly more conventional turn when she married Gangadhar Rao Newalkar, the Maharaja of the small but strategic state of Jhansi. Upon her marriage, she was given a new name, Lakshmibai. She was now the Rani of Jhansi. For a time, life followed a royal script. In 1851, she gave birth to an heir, but tragedy struck when the infant died only 4 months later. The loss was personally and dynastically devastating. The Maharaja, his health already failing, was left without a natural heir. Desperate, Gangadhar Rao followed a long-standing Hindu tradition and adopted a successor, his 5-year-old cousin, renaming him Damodar Rao. The dying Maharaja dictated a letter to the British, entrusting the governance of Jhansi to his wife during their son's minority and insisting his heir be treated with respect. He believed he had secured Jhansi's future. He was wrong. The Maharaja died the very next day, in November 1853, and with his death, the British Empire saw its chance. The British Governor-General at the time was Lord Dalhousie, a man driven to expand British territory in India. His perfect tool for this was a policy known as the Doctrine of Lapse. It stated that any princely state under British influence would be annexed if the ruler died without a natural male heir. This policy was a direct attack on Indian tradition. For centuries, Indian rulers had the right to choose their successors, and adoption was a legally and culturally accepted practice. The Doctrine of Lapse erased this right. The British now decided who was a legitimate ruler. An adopted son, they declared, could inherit his father's private property, but not his throne. The kingdom itself would lapse back to British control. It was, in essence, a legal framework for theft, dressed in colonial paperwork. Despite the Maharaja's careful planning, Lord Dalhousie applied the doctrine without hesitation. Damodar Rao's claim was rejected. Jhansi was to be annexed. In March 1854, Rani Lakshmibai was informed of the decision. She was offered a pension, often cited as 60,000 rupees annually, and ordered to vacate the palace and the Jhansi fort. The British expected quiet acceptance. They were dealing with a young widow and assumed she would retire into obscurity. They misjudged their opponent completely. Stripped of her kingdom and her son denied his birthright, Lakshmibai was left with a burning sense of injustice. Her response was one of cold, defiant resolve. It said she uttered a phrase that would echo through the ages, "Meri Jhansi nahi dungi." "I will not surrender my Jhansi." The line had been drawn. The queen was about to become a rebel. For 3 years, Lakshmibai lived under the watch of the British administration, a queen with no kingdom. But as discontent simmered across northern India, she began to prepare. When the Great Rebellion broke out in May 1857, the shockwave soon reached Jhansi. The local garrison of sepoys mutinied, seized the Star Fort, and massacred several British officers and their families. Lakshmibai's role in this initial massacre is still debated. Some British accounts blamed her, while others suggest she was coerced by the mutineers. What is clear is that in the power vacuum that followed, she took control, ruling as regent for her son. Her transformation was absolute. No longer just a petitioner, she was a head of state and commander-in-chief. She rapidly organized her troops, fortified the city, and reportedly even established a foundry to cast cannons. For several months, Jhansi was a peaceful island of Indian rule. She proved to be a capable administrator, but her main focus was defense, personally inspecting the walls and rallying her people. In March 1858, the reckoning arrived. Sir Hugh Rose, a capable and ruthless British commander, appeared before Jhansi with the Central India Field Force. He demanded unconditional surrender. From the ramparts of her fortress, Rani Lakshmibai gave her answer. She would fight. The siege of Jhansi began around March 24, 1858. For 2 weeks, the city held out against relentless British bombardment. Dressed as a soldier, the Rani was everywhere, directing cannon fire and rallying her troops. An urgent appeal to her old comrade, Tatya Tope, brought a rebel army of over 20,000 to break the siege. But in a fierce battle, Rose's smaller, better disciplined force crushed Tope's army. The last hope for Jhansi was gone. On April 3rd, British forces breached the city walls. What followed was a horrific slaughter as vengeful soldiers pillaged the city for days. Some estimates claim as many as 5,000 of Jhansi's defenders and citizens were killed. But the queen was not captured. What followed is one of the most iconic, if legendary, moments in Indian history. With her young son, Damodar Rao, said to be tied securely to her back, she mounted her horse. Surrounded by loyal guards, she made a daring escape from the fort under the cover of darkness. Legend claims her horse died in a great leap from the walls. But the Rani and her son survived. She had lost her city, but not her freedom. Now a fugitive, Rani Lakshmibai regrouped with other rebel leaders, including Tatya Tope and Rao Sahib, at Kalpi. Her daring escape was already becoming legendary, but she often clashed with other rebel commanders who were hesitant to accept a woman's leadership. Despite this, her strategic mind was undeniable. The rebels fought and lost to Rose's forces at Kunch and again at Kalpi on May 22nd. It seemed the rebellion in central India was crushed, but in a final, audacious move, they marched on Gwalior, a powerful city fortress whose ruler was allied with the British. The Maharaja's army, however, sympathized with the rebellion. When the Rani and her allies arrived, the army deserted the Maharaja and joined them without a fight. Suddenly, the rebels had a powerful fort, a massive treasury, and a well-equipped army. This stunning victory, however, proved to be a fatal mistake. The rebel leaders wasted precious time in celebration, and Lakshmibai's warnings to prepare for a counterattack were largely ignored. Sir Hugh Rose marched his forces swiftly towards Gwalior. The final battle was about to begin. On June 17th or 18th, 1858, the British advanced on the rebels near Kota Ki Sarai. This is where the legend of the Queen burned alive completely diverges from the historical record. The truth is far more heroic. Rani Lakshmibai didn't wait in the fort. She donned a cavalry leader's uniform, mounted her horse, and rode into the heart of the battle. She was, in these final hours, a soldier. Accounts of her death vary in the details, but the core events are consistent. During a charge by the 8th Hussars, a British cavalry regiment, the Rani was caught in the fighting. She was unhorsed and grievously wounded by a saber and possibly a gunshot. Her attendants carried her from the battlefield to a nearby garden or hermit's hut. Her final order was not a plea for her life, but a command to protect her honor. Knowing death was imminent, she feared the British would capture and display her body. She gave her followers one last command: cremate her immediately so her enemies could not touch her. Her followers built a hasty funeral pyre and performed the last rites, ensuring the warrior queen's final act of defiance was a success. She died a soldier's death, and her body was consecrated by fire, by her own people, on her own terms. The real stories of history are often more powerful than the legends they inspire. If you agree and you want to keep exploring the truth behind the myths, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Within days of her death, the British captured Gwalior fort, effectively crushing the rebellion in central India. The cause for which Rani Lakshmibai fought was lost, but her legacy was just beginning. The very men who fought against her were the first to acknowledge her greatness. Sir Hugh Rose, the general who pursued her relentlessly, wrote in his report that the Rani, remarkable for her beauty, cleverness, and perseverance, had been the most dangerous of all the rebel leaders. Another British officer is famously reported to have said of her, "Here lay the woman who was the only man among the rebels." It was a backhanded compliment, born of the era's sexism, but a compliment nonetheless. They knew they had fought against a will of iron. In the decades that followed, as India's struggle for independence grew, Rani Lakshmibai was transformed into a national heroine. She became a symbol of courage against overwhelming odds and a refusal to bow to injustice. The myth of her being burned alive by the British likely grew from the true story of her cremation, a detail twisted over time into a narrative of enemy desecration rather than one of final personal victory. The true story is more powerful. Rani Lakshmibai was not a passive victim. She was an agent of her own destiny, a brilliant leader, and a fierce soldier who fought for her rights until her last breath. She died on the battlefield, sword in hand, a warrior to the very end. Her real story is not one of martyrdom, but of magnificent, heroic defiance. And that is a legacy far greater than any legend.